Hello everybody and welcome to another 10 Things to Love or Hate video. Today we're going to be talking about Dark Souls 3. I know this has been long awaited since I did the podcast tree, I believe about a month ago on Dark Souls 1 and 2. So let's not waste any time and let's get right into it with the number one thing that I hate about this fucking game. I think this is contradicting something I said in the other video, but forget about all that. Dogs. Oh my god. I said in this series that I was going to wait to talk about certain things until I could choose the game that was most characteristic of how bad or good something was, and holy shit, are dogs a nightmare in this game. The teleporting dogs. Yes, I said teleporting because the dogs are not only bad because they're persistent, they're little motherfucking ankle biters, and they just constantly come after you. Sometimes it's hard to hit them because they're too low to the ground. They're pests, but they also teleport, and it is an absolute nightmare. It's such a small, petty complaint, but the fact that you can run away from a dog and then all of a sudden it'll teleport up behind you or land on top of your head or some dumb shit like that. Hopefully I'll find some footage of it to put on the screen. I can't imagine that I won't because it used to fuck me up in my speedruns so much back in the day. I mean, fair enough. You say, D-Mod, you're always speedrunning these games. Souls games aren't meant to be speedrun. You're meant to be playing them casually, slowly, taking your time, enjoying the world, all that jazz. And sure, if you like block a dog with a shield and kill it, it's really not that bad. But they are just so annoying to me. And this is my list, of course. This is my opinion, as always. And my opinion is fuck dogs in Dark Souls. Dogs in real life are great. If you like dogs, so do I. Dogs are great. So let's talk about something I love. And this is probably something people are going to be on the fence about. Fan service. I love the fan service in Dark Souls 3. However, there's a caveat. I love the fan service in the first playthrough. I'll explain what I mean. I love going back through the game and seeing so many nods to things that we've seen before. Some of the biggest are going back to Anor Londo and using the Storm Ruler on Yorm as a nod to Demon Souls. There's nods all over the place. I'm not the biggest lore buff or anything like that. I'm sure there's loads and loads that I'm missing. And obviously this is a sequel in lore and name to Dark Souls 1 and 2, so there's going to be plenty of them. It was really great seeing all those things, and it kind of felt like a best of collection the first time playing through. It was very, very exciting. But as you continue to play through the game on subsequent playthroughs or New Game Plus, you realize the game feels very uninspired and even unnecessary. This is something that I touched on in the Dark Souls 2 portion of the podcast tree. I felt like Dark Souls didn't need a sequel. I feel like Dark Souls in its entirety was a very well thought out and quality experience that ended with you either linking the flame or bringing in the Age of Dark. And I felt like that was a good thing to leave it on. That's not to say there weren't any room for sequels. There were room for sequels. I just didn't know that they were necessary. I've said before that I wish instead of a Dark Souls 2 and a Dark Souls 3, we got more spiritual successors or more games that created the same formula. And it really did, to me, feel like Miyazaki wanted to redeem the series after Dark Souls 2, because we all know Dark Souls 2 was very controversial amongst the community. Some people loved it, some people hated it. I personally like it a lot, but don't think it's as good as the rest necessarily. So it felt like Miyazaki wanted to come back and be like, okay, we're going to make a return to form, but it was as if he felt so pigeonholed in what Dark Souls needed to be that he relied heavily on things that were popularized in the original Dark Souls. He even brought some of the Bloodborne formula with the game's faster pace, and he definitely has brought his improvements over making multiple games like Bloodborne to upping things in quality over the entire course of the game, but it makes the game feel generic because it feels almost like it has no identity within the Souls universe. It doesn't feel like its own thing necessarily. It just kind of feels like it relies way too heavily on Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, and especially the original Dark Souls for its inspiration, and it doesn't bring a whole lot of its own stuff to the table. We have new lore, of course, if you're a lore buff, and that's exciting. There's the weapon arts, which in theory seemed really cool to me because I like transformation weapons from Bloodborne. They're one of my favorite things from any game ever. I love transformation weapons, and I was excited thinking Dark Souls was going to try to bring in some combos or something like that, and weapon arts do somewhat bring in combos, and they're interesting, but they didn't turn out to be all that useful. I mean, mainly because this game is kind of R1 spam the game. I have always been an R1 spammer. I've always been a very casual player in that regard. If you've seen my Dark Souls 2 footage, you know I use the rapier and twin blade, the speedrun, thing. I used Henri's straight sword in Dark Souls 3 for a long time. I used the sellsword twin blades because I've speedrun the game, so I always use like the optimal maximized build or whatever for the game. And I've gotten a lot of flack for that over time, but if the tools are in the game, use what's available to you. If you want to set a challenge for yourself, do it by all means. I've done soul level 1 runs of this game and all 3 of the Dark Souls games and beaten all 3 of them. But if you want to set yourself a challenge, that's up to you if you want to do that. I just feel like Dark Souls 3 could have been more. If you were gonna make it really worthwhile. And in some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't. We'll talk more about that. The number 4 thing I hate is because of how generic it feels. And not only that, but the setting that they chose for Dark Souls 3 with the world and the cycle of fire coming to an end. The world is covered in ash, and because of this, the world feels very drab in appearance. It feels very lifeless. It's intended for sure. It's because it's meant to be covered in ash. It's like everything is dying, but that doesn't make it pleasing to look at. When I think of some of the settings in Dark Souls 1, like Anar Londo and the Darkroot Basin, even Undead Burg and Ash Lake, so many things come to mind, even Blighttown. I feel like they all had color, a vibrance to them that really made everything pop and really made it enjoyable to the eye. I feel like the aesthetic in Dark Souls 3, for the most part, is very blah, for lack of a better word. That's such a lame word to use, but it's true. It's just very most of the time. Like, there's a couple cool places like Archdragon Peak, and the DLC did a bit better of a job with it to some extent. Especially the second DLC, the Ring City, has some absolutely fantastic looking locations. So there's some, but I don't know. Particularly the opening. The Cemetery of Ash is, sure, it's a Cemetery of Ash, but still, it just doesn't look as good. And then it comes to number 5. In the Cemetery of Ash, you're led into Firelink Shrine, which, again, was a fan service thing, but it doesn't even really look like Firelink Shrine anymore. It's kind of boring. It's just a network of tunnels covered in ash with thrones. It's thematic and fits the game, but that doesn't make it exciting. But that's not really what I don't like about it. I don't like that this game didn't use a connected hub world like the other games. Even Dark Souls 2, for all it gets shit on for being linear, it has its own separate hub world that still connects to everything else. It's not disconnected from the world entirely. The only other games that have that are Bloodborne and Demon Souls. And in Demon Souls, I feel like it made sense. It was very well done. The Nexus had a very central purpose, and it was nice to go back to the Nexus and have a breath from the demons. This is where everyone was hiding away, and you were able to go through the Archstones to the respective locations. In Bloodborne, it makes sense because it's also lore relevant. It is thematic. I will give credit to say I actually enjoy the Hunter's Dream design. I do think it's very interesting, and I like how it's as if you're going from a dream to the real world to the dream to the real world, and it creates a very haunting atmosphere that sets the game's tone. But I wouldn't say that I love it in Bloodborne either. It could have also been connected better in Bloodborne, but this one just feels silly. It's this interesting Cemetery of Ash place that, yeah, it doesn't look that interesting, but it's cool in theory. And you go into Firelink Shrine, and there's just this fire. And this fire just takes you to Lothric Castle. I was so confused at first. Like, obviously, you get the sword from Adex Gundyr that you put in to make the fire. And I was like, oh, okay, that's it. We're just teleporting to Lothric Castle. It's like, oh, now I've been dumped in the real world. I guess there is probably lore sensibility to it, so you can make the same excuse that you do for Demon Souls and Bloodborne. I just think that it was something that was central to Dark Souls. When I think Dark Souls, I think interconnected world design, and it was disappointing to see them make the hub world separate in this one. I feel like it was a lazy choice, and I feel like they could have done it better. So we've been talking a lot about things that I hate, and generally they kind of connect to each other. It's just that the game felt uninspired, unnecessary, it felt generic, drab, and it felt like the world wasn't as connected as it could have been. Those are all kind of equal complaints, but I decided to break them down into different things to give a natural flow. Let's talk a little bit about what I love. There are some things that I love about this game. Do not get me wrong. I don't hate this game even if I'm critical of it. I do like the fluidity of combat in this game. I mentioned that the weapon arts do kind of add some combo in, so they are at least there, and they're fun to try out and use. I feel like they did give a good variety of weapons in this game, which was refreshing after Bloodborne. Even though I feel like the transformation weapons, I'd still take 25 unique transformation weapons over 150 weapons that are really just 25 weapons, and some of them have different names and different types or whatever. But the combat in this game is like a collection of all they've learned from the previous games that they've made. So it's almost like, if I could describe it, it's Dark Souls combat sped up a bit to line a little bit more with Bloodborne. It's certainly not Bloodborne's combat, but you do get the impression that they wanted to give a little bit more speed to it, which was nice, because I definitely prefer the speedier combat. I don't like the slow-paced, hide behind a shield bullcrap. Not that that's not doable in this game, and excuse me for saying bullcrap. I don't mean that that is a bad way to play. It's just the way I don't like to play. If you like to play that way, that's totally fine. And as they learned with the combat, the number 3 love is the rising boss quality. I said that I didn't want to talk much about bosses in these videos, and I don't want to talk about them too much because I've given tons and tons of time and focus to the bosses. But one thing I have to credit Dark Souls 3 for, and probably the thing I love most about the game, is the rising boss quality. They really over time learned what their strengths and weaknesses were with bosses. They have never been very strong with puzzle bosses, and there are quite a few in Dark Souls 3, and I would say the puzzle bosses do tend to be on the worst end, with bosses like Volnir and Deacons, if you want to consider that a puzzle boss. Yorm, who, while I like as a boss, understand why people have problems with Yorm. The Ancient Wyvern, but there are enough of the bosses that are the humanoid or big bosses that people really love to fight in this game, and when they're good, they are so fucking good. Gale, Freed, Watcher, Cinder, Pontiff, Princes, Champion Gundyr, Nameless King, and personally want to give a shout out to Dark Eater Meteor. I know people find Meteor to be the hardest boss in the game. I do as well. I posted in my boss ranking, my final boss ranking of Dark Souls 3, that I thought Meteor was the hardest boss, and I stand by that. I do think Meteor is the hardest boss, but I also think Meteor is very fair. A lot of people I've seen in the comments talk as if he's some kind of bullshit boss, and I completely disagree. I feel like Meteor, perhaps other than Ludwig, is one of the very few times that Miyazaki has managed to perfectly craft a fair boss that is a big beast. Because it's not easy to scale something well that's so much larger in life than the player and make it fair, because often the body becomes a hitbox and there's some bullshit that gets involved. But Meteor has counters to everything. For as much as he attacks you viciously, he gives you ample time to dodge, and then he gives you time to attack his head afterwards if you take that approach, which that is the approach that you should take. You should try to stay in front of him and keep attacking his head. But the bosses in this game are excellent, and I've said many, many times over that at the end of the day, for me, I don't care that much about the areas in Dark Souls. I don't care that much about the lore. I don't care that much about making different builds. What I really appreciate about this series is the bosses, and that's why I spent all the time making boss rankings, because I really wanted to talk about it. It's what I'm passionate about when it comes to this series. That's not to neglect the things I just mentioned and saying that I don't care about them and saying they're bad, but after one playthrough of the game, those things become irrelevant to me, and it's just about fighting the bosses over and over again. That's what got me into speedrunning, was the idea that I would get to fight bosses over and over again. And this is a good time to mention, before we go into the next love, that there is a boss rush mod for Dark Souls 3. It allows you essentially to fight the bosses in any order you would like to, and it has a Homer Bone mechanic that will return you to Firelink, and you can buy all the items from the handmade shrine. Now, I would explain more in detail, but I will be uploading a speed run of the boss rush tomorrow with a tutorial if you would like to check it out. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. Let's wrap this up with a couple other things I love. The music. When it goes into the bosses, you can't avoid talking about the music. I feel as if the music in this game, when it hits its high notes with the bosses, pretty much every boss I just mentioned, like the Watchers, Nameless King, Gale, Cinder, all have incredible music. It might actually be the best in the series. I think that Bloodborne, for me, probably has the best bosses overall in the series in music, but Dark Souls 3 is very, very close. And after everything I've said, the final thing that I love is just that it concludes the Dark Souls series. I'm happy that the Dark Souls series is over, because it's time for the series to be put to rest and for FromSoft to try new things. I think FromSoft created a fantastic formula with these games. That's evident by all the memes and jokes that we get these days about being the new Dark Souls. Everybody seems to want to be the new Dark Souls. And I think what they say when they want to be the new Dark Souls is they want to have that identifiable difficulty that people resonate with and enjoy. When people talk about games that are hard, they do not like games that are hard because they're unfair. I think that's why Cuphead resonated so well with a lot of people, not only because of its animation and music, of course, and maybe what appeals about Dark Souls is something, the lore and the weapons and the combat and things like that. But at the end of the day, people want things to be fair when it comes to difficulty. We want to be challenged as gamers, and FromSoft, for as much as they've had shitboxes, for whatever mistakes they've made throughout the entire time with this series, they have managed to create something that has not quite been replicated perfectly by any of the clones of this game to this point. So I look forward heavily to seeing what FromSoft has in store for us next. If you want to hear my hope for what I would like to see next, I would very, very much like to see a new game. I don't want to see Bloodborne 2, I don't want to see Dark Souls 4, I don't want to see Demon Souls 2, I don't want to see remakes of the games. I want to see FromSoft do something new. I want to see another Bloodborne, and when I say another Bloodborne, I do not mean Bloodborne 2. I want to see them take the formula and create something new with it. As much as I love the combat in Bloodborne, and would love to see them do a spiritual successor to Bloodborne where I could see more of that combat style, I'd be happy even if they did something where they took it to some Egyptian theme and made the combat even slower than Dark Souls in some way, shape, or form. That's just a random idea. I'm sure we could spit out things like Cyberpunk Souls, Western Souls, like you could say things all day long. The sky is the limit for what FromSoft can do, and I truly believe in a company that made games this fantastic that they can hit that magic again, and I think they most certainly will. So when we talk about my score for Dark Souls 3, I'm going to say that I liked it. I didn't love this game. I certainly wasn't indifferent to it. I liked this game. And the reason I like it, while it seemed like I may have been harsh on the game, is because, like I said, I care about the bosses and this game delivers in that category. But I can't bring myself to love it because it just doesn't feel inspired enough to be something that I could really, really be passionate about. Before we go, there's one last thing that I want to do. I mentioned that I would rank the series of the Souls games, and I have no intention of making a separate video to do that because what would I say in that video? I would just talk about the same things I've already talked about in these videos about the games and why I do and don't like them. So I just want to give you a very short ranking of where I would put the games from number 6 all the way up to number 1. And I say number 6 because number 6 is Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin, because fuck Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. It gets its own bottom, far below tier of everything else because it is the dishonorable mention, and it is different enough from the base game of Dark Souls 2 that it needs to be mentioned. Number 5 of the actual games, if you want to talk about it that way, is Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3, other than the bosses and the music and the polished combat, there's not much I like about Dark Souls 3. That is a big chunk of what I do like about the series, but it doesn't do anything else that really stands out to me heavily, so it's definitely a fun game, but my least favorite in the series for sure. Dark Souls 2 comes in at number 4. Dark Souls 2 actually is a pretty damn good game, and I should give that context saying my least favorite is a game I like. So with Dark Souls 2, I'd say Dark Souls 2 is also a game I like. I enjoy it very much. I like everything pretty much but the DLC in the games, and that's with the exception of the DLC bosses. I actually find the areas in Dark Souls 2 to be more compelling than the ones in Dark Souls 3, and I like the builds in that game more. I find the weapons more fun to use. Even though I like being a filthy R1 spammer, I find what you can do in that game to be pretty exciting. Those are the 2 that I like, and of course the one at the bottom that I fucking hate. And number 3 is Dark Souls, the original Dark Souls. You may see a pattern here that Dark Souls is my least favorite of the franchise in terms of what I like, but it's unquestionable that Dark Souls is a game that I love. It is a fantastic game, and I spoke very much about everything that I liked about it. Of course, there are a few things that I don't. And one of those things is the drop in quality in the second half of the game, and that is enough that I can't put it at number 2. If the game even kept up 3/4 of its quality through that way through, then I would probably put it at 2. It may even be a contender for number 1. But because of that drop, I just can't bring myself to bring it up. Number 2, and another game I love, is Demon Souls. Demon Souls is a fantastic game. There's some atmosphere about Demon Souls that I still haven't found to be captured by any of the other games. There's something haunting about it. I don't know if it's that echoey NPC dialogue, I'm not sure, but it's the one that started it all, and I still think it holds up very well today. I know there's a lot of people that hope for a Demon Souls remaster, and I understand why. It's on PS3, and that's kind of inconvenient for a lot of people. It's older, but the game still holds up very well today. I didn't play until 2015, so I can't claim nostalgia for the game. I just quite frankly think it's an amazingly designed game, and even though it certainly does show some age, it holds up well enough, and I fucking love the game. But when you talk about what I fucking adore, it's Bloodborne, without a doubt. I don't think this comes as a surprise to anybody. Anyone who's raged in my comments saying DMod is a biased Bloodborne fanboy, you can now feel vindicated, validated, and know that yes, Bloodborne is my favorite Souls game without any shadow of a doubt. Bloodborne is not only my favorite Souls game, Bloodborne is one of my favorite games of all time. I would give this the category of putting it higher to say, I don't love this game, I adore it. I am all about Bloodborne. And that's what we're going to talk about next time. I am getting a Bloodborne 10 things video ready for you guys, and I am very excited about that. I hope you enjoyed today's video. As I said, tomorrow I will be releasing a speedrun commentary tutorial on the Dark Souls 3 boss rush, but I hope you enjoyed watching today's video. I want to hear what you guys think about Dark Souls 3 in the comments. I want to hear what you think about my ranking of the games. Try not to be too harsh on me. I promise you I will give good reasons for why I love Bloodborne, and I want to reiterate one last time, just so I can have an excuse to say I have a reason to stave off all the criticism. I love all of the games. I really do. I love Dark Souls. If it seems like I don't, maybe I am a little jaded from how much I've played and talked about the games in the last couple years, but I'm just critical of something that I love quite a lot. And I know you guys love it too. And I love you guys very much. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.